welcome back to another Ashes of Creations development update breakdown video. As usual, it is my goal to break down the long format stream that the Intrepid Studio gives us and pull out the juicy bits and give you my thoughts on what the Intrepid team is showing us and kind of start a conversation for people that may not know very much about the game. This month we get quite a bit of gameplay footage, mostly focused on the Cleric. Hope you guys are excited about that. And with that being said, let's kick it off with the YouTube highlighted comment.
So for today's question, Papa Smurf 6834 is our lovely spotlight, and they had asked or mentioned, in the open world PvP system, will there be a prevent attacking innocent option that when turned on will prevent me from accidentally attacking a non-corrupted player? I say this because griefers are often very good at making you attack them by accident.
Ooh, good
Yeah.
question. So there's a few things here. First and foremost is that the open world flagging PvP system requires what we call force function in order to initiate an attack against another player. And by default, that's even against players who are already flagged, though not against players who are corrupt. And there in the settings, you will have options by which you can you can persist that force function if you wish through another keystroke input. And then additionally, you can set your AoEs so that if you initiate an AoE attack against a location and there are flagged players there, you can set it so that you will automatically hit those flagged players. But by default, it doesn't. So those are options in your settings that you will have access to and be able to adjust.
Now look, I think the worries and complaints about the PvP flagging system in this game that doesn't technically exist yet has been blown way out of proportion. With that being said, I think it's a good thing that we can customize our settings, with how our abilities interact with other players. I think that's good looking out from the devs. I look forward to testing out in Alpha 2. I'm kind of tired of talking about it, I'll be honest with you. Next up, we have the next set of cosmetics. As a reminder, you can buy these from the Ashes of Creations website. There's different bundles that range in price from $75 to $375. However, Steven has said many times that they do not rely on these purchases to fund the game. The funding of the game is completed all the way through launch. They don't need your money. Buy it if you just want something extra for yourself, or more than likely if you want an alpha or beta key. So, just a disclaimer there. This month's items, not exactly my favorite aesthetic, but I can't deny that the concept looks good. That cloak goes hard, that snake is terrifying, and that lizard looks like a good boy. Now, onto the juicy bits. The Cleric and the Day-Night Cycle Showcase. As always, this is a work in progress. They still have not looked into balancing. The visuals aren't finalized. But those disclaimers should not stop you from providing feedback. I always enjoy reading your feedbacks and my comments, and that's literally the entire point of this open development cycle that the devs are doing, is they want your feedback as it goes. If you want to provide feedback directly to the Intrepid team, go to their YouTube video or go to the forums. If someone has really good points on my videos, I'll go make a forum post myself. So, got it? Cool. Now, as with every time I see gameplay, I have to gush on the visuals. They managed to hit a perfect blend of realistic, mature art in a fantasy setting. Now, this takes place in the alpine forest of the Riverlands, the same area we've been in for all the gameplay showcases so far. I love the sun coming down and lighting up the foggy sky. Beautiful. Now, Steven is playing as the Cleric throughout this gameplay showcase, and with him you will see the Ranger and the Fighter that they've showcased in previous months. Now, the fun begins when the party runs into some skinwalkers. Now, I'm unsure if these are supposed to be undead or not, but they seem to fight just like a regular wolf, and I guess I was hoping they would stand up on two legs or morph into something different. I mean, they're skinwalkers, so I'm not really sure what that means. And now we get to see some combat from the Cleric. Right now, Steven is running with a mace and a shield. I can't really decide how I feel about it. I think what looks off to me about that is that the enemies don't get staggered when he hits them. The combo's just a bit too graceful for a mace. It's a bludgeoning weapon. Now, I'm unsure if it's intentional or just not in the game yet. I think a little bit of reaction from the enemies, even if they just shake a little bit, I think will go a long way here. Getting blasted in the face with a mace would definitely make me flinch. Maybe these zombies are just built different. And here, you see Steven use a new spell called Chains of Restraint. It's a hard-casted ability that places this circular, almost consecrated ground effect down. It deals damage to all enemies in range, and it also staggers them. One of the cool things about Ashes is how the crowd control can be synergized with your teammates, which there'll be more on that later. But if you watch other parts of the gameplay, when Steven uses this spell, it'll stun the enemies instead, because one of his teammates had already staggered the enemies, and so it progressed the crowd control from a stagger into a stun. Now this spell here is just a healing spell that for now just heals a single target. However, a few seconds later, he casts it on an enemy as well to do damage to them. Now I really enjoy spells that have multiple uses like that. It almost gives the illusion of having more spells than you really do. However, more importantly, it gave Steven a stack of Conviction. Now this is a resource unique to the Cleric that will empower his spells. The more Conviction the Cleric has pulls, the more they affect their abilities. Now, from what the developers said during this, and from what we saw in the gameplay, it seems that Conviction only empowers your healing spells. I would love to see Conviction stacking to a point where you're able to unleash this incredibly powerful Holy Smite move. It'd be a good point for clerics to have some decision making, and would reward the party for doing mechanics correctly by letting the cleric use their conviction stacks on DPS instead of having to use them on healing. Now skipping ahead a bit, we can see Steven use Communal Restoration. This is a multi-target healing spell. Looks very similar to the single target spell from earlier. It reaches up, pulls holy light down from the sky. It's a pretty awesome visual. But it is on a 20-second cooldown, so this is not a spammable heal. Next, Steven uses Cleansing Wave, which normally would just hit a single target, but because he had a stack of Conviction, it bounced to an additional target and became a chain heal. And the more stacks he has, the more people it bounces to. Finally, for the Cleric, we got some two-handed staff combat, much faster than the mace. It's more or less just a stick, so it doesn't look so odd that enemies aren't flinching when they get hit. And that was the extent of the new reveals for the Cleric. I, of course, cut a lot of this footage down. It's a 40-minute video, so if you want to go check that out, it's on the Ashes of Creations YouTube channel. Go check it out if you want to watch the whole gameplay. You can see more interactions between the abilities. And next up, the developers talked a bit about different type of magic being more or less effective against different enemies. Here they are now.
Obviously, you'll be able to do the content, but you'll have an easier time with certain contents, if you're using a certain spec over others. So, obviously we're going up against undead, and as is natural, they're probably going to be a little weaker against your holy magic than Keenan's nature element, for example.
Wow, Keenan, you gonna let him talk to you about your nature like that?
Now, I have mixed feelings about this. I do enjoy when different classes can have some extra flavor when it makes sense, such as holy magic being more effective against the undead. It becomes a delicate balancing act, though, when it comes to tuning. If you don't do it right, you'll get try-hard groups that will only let certain classes in when running group content. If you're trying to form a dungeon group and the dungeon is undead themed, such as the area we're seeing now, there's going to be some groups out there that will only let classes with a cleric as secondary or primary archetype into their group because they want that extra damage from the holy magic. Now, I hope this isn't the case. It's just something to keep an eye on. Now, rewinding in the gameplay a bit, the party took a break to speed up time and show the transition from day to night. It won't happen this fast in game. The transition will take a few hours for us, but you get to actually see the sun go down. We see a few of Vera's moons. Interestingly, one of those moons looked like it has seen better days. Now, Steven is looking for a constellation of stars, and I want you guys to hear the ambiance of the night and the sounds of the crickets. So I'm going to shut up for this part, turn on the game audio. You guys tell me what you think.
We are trying to look, we need each of us to kind of look in the sky in certain directions to identify one of these constellations. And I think what we are looking for is what was once called a Bagormal, but now is called a Dawn Breaker, I believe. So try to look all around as you can in the night sky and identify the location of the Dawnbreaker. Where is the Dawnbreaker? It should have told me where it was. Oh, there we go! We found the Dawnbreaker! Do you guys... Oh, it's right next to the destroyed moon.
Oh, that'll help.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, it looks so good. I love it. Now that's... Oh, it went away. Sad.
Now, Steven's talking was a bit distracting, but the sounds of the crickets, the skybox, the fog rolling through the graveyard, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I hope this is how it looks on launch, honestly. What do you guys think? Now, there were some follow-up questions to the Cleric showcase, which I pulled out the more interesting ones.
So first, can you explain a little bit more about the staggering and how status effects stagger and stun and that whole interaction works?
Yes.
Good.
So staggering is a type of status condition that can be applied through certain skills. And the type of synergy systems we're going for is that certain archetypes and class kits will have access to a number of what we call first tier status conditions. Those types of status conditions are general status conditions that can be applied across a host of skills and a number of different archetypes and class kits, and they can progress when synergized with other types of status conditions or abilities to tier 2 level status effects. And so, for example, you saw that one of the abilities that the Cleric has at level 15 is the Chains of Restraint. And when the Chains of Restraint lays down that AoE, of course, it ticks for damage over time, but it also applies the stagger condition. However, if the target was already subject to the staggered condition, then it gets promoted to a stunned condition. Now, the difference between staggered and stun, in a staggered state, the creature may not use abilities. They can do basic attack functions. They could cast spells if they had access to spells, but their physical abilities would be muted or would be essentially inaccessible during the staggered effect. Now, a stun condition obviously is a more amplified status condition where you cannot take any actions. And so the fighter's ability, Whirlwind, had a staggered application available to it. So when the Cleric chooses to use its Chains of Restraint ability, if they use it after the fighter applies their staggered condition, then the change will force a stun effect.
All right. And then folks are wondering, will those stuns work on all enemy types, or will there be ones that will be specific to certain types of animal or creatures? I don't know why I said animals.
Generally, status conditions will apply to all creature and player types. There are, of course, some creatures such as bosses and or raid bosses that have very high resistances or cannot be affected by certain status conditions. In that case, obviously, those status effects will not apply, but the rest of the skills ability will, like the damage.
And a follow-up to that, will those things stack? So if I'm, a fighter and I put certain effect on something and someone else is also a fighter and puts that effect on, do those things now stack?
It depends. There's unique rules with regards to stacking based on the type of status condition. So in the event that the status condition may not stack, we have certain stacking rules that might increase the longevity of the status condition with the second application. But it's important to note that we do have the concept of diminishing returns, and that certain types of status conditions share certain diminishing return groupings, so that obviously a character can't be like stun locked or silence locked or just a particular type of status condition lock.
All right. And then Dale Splight would like to know, can you cast in movement or do you have to stand still? And I saw quite a few people mentioning this.
Most abilities you'll find in Ashes of Creation are capable of being cast while moving. Some of those abilities might slow your movement during the cast, but you can continue to move. Very rarely, and depending on obviously the the importance of the ability or the power level of that ability, you might be rooted in place. So for example, the AoE ability has a lot going on. It has damage ticking over time. It is an area of effect. It also has a status condition application. And in those instances, the player character gets rooted.
Tryndamere would like to know whether you'd be able to heal yourself as like other archetypes, like a paladin or something of that sort, or class types.
Yeah, I mean, it depends obviously on the secondary class selection. No one is going to fill the role of a primary healer other than the healer archetype. But there will be secondary class options that you can select, which will provide you with some level of sustainability and or restoration. Most of that will be centralized to yourself, especially in the case of a paladin.
All right. And then moving on to day-night stuff, we had Radgal who wants to know, is the day-night cycle tied to server time?
The day-night cycle is tied to server time. Yes, so there is a number of hours that exist between each of the cycles. That's something that will be fine-tuning, of course, during Alpha 2 as well. But it is intended for players to kind of interact with certain systems even based on in-game time as well. So, yeah.
And then they showed some more concept art, namely a basic staff, mace, and shield compared to the weapons that Steven used during the showcase. Now keep in mind that these are somewhere around like level 14 weapons, with a level cap at launch expected to be 50. Now these weapons are nice. The mace, I especially like the engraving into the metal, but it really makes me wonder what we're going to get at level cap. Then they showed a goblin slaver. Now this guy is cool. He has a mechanic where if he defeats you in battle, instead of killing you and you respawn and blah blah blah, he will actually capture you and take you to a camp and put you in a cage, which starts like this little mini side quest where you have to try and escape from their camp. That sounds pretty cool to me. Also sounds like it could be annoying if I keep getting killed by goblin slavers, so I'll have to make sure that doesn't happen. Then they showed some zombie shamblers, this adorable Goaticorn, and the cultist. And then last but not least, we have the Q&A session.
Nova Chrono wants to know about large-scale combat. Have you given any thought towards adding debuff protection, such as having immunity to stuns for some seconds after having been stunned during a siege battle? And there was actually some questions regarding this beyond just sieges.
So just to be clear, what you're talking about is really called diminishing returns. And when it comes to status conditions, the ability to apply certain passive resistance to status conditions, if you've suffered from a status condition of a particular type, you get an increased resistance against those, and that scales. So if by chance you do get stunned maybe a couple of times, excuse me, it would be near impossible to stun you for a third or fourth time, right? And then you get to save that higher resistance for some period of time. And you know, that just makes the gameplay more compelling. We've all played games where you can get stun locked, and that is a really bad feeling. And it's not even fun for the person who's doing the stun lock. It might be, you know, yeah, it's just not a good, compelling type of gameplay. So in order to kind of avoid that, and to accommodate a massively multiplayer setting, you have to utilize things like diminishing returns that can increase your resistances when you suffer those types of effects.
All right, and Dolium wants to know about taverns. What benefits do players receive for taking on the role of a tavern owner?
Well, one, you will get noticeability with regards to your creations, because that will be displayed to the characters that consume those things. But in addition, you can get certain types of itemization rewards depending on the number of patrons that you serve. You can also reap economic rewards such as gold from the inn that you are selling your goods at. And then you can unlock access to certain types of recipes and or vendors based on the level of reputation you build up in that particular node.
Our next question
Yes.
here is from Jalon, and he wants to know about player death loot tables. Given that you drop processed goods when you die, and alchemy and cooking are now in the processing category, does that mean when you die you drop food, potions, beverages, etc.?
Good question. As a point of clarity, no, you don't. You do not drop those. So when the things that you drop are the things that are materials and gatherables that are used in the generation of something else. Because alchemy, because cooking has reached its final stage product, that is an item that's protected within your inventory. So food, dishes, and those types of buff items, the potions, those do not drop on death.
Things up. We have a question from Kastai, and they want to know about musical instruments. Bards will have the ability to play musical instruments, but will they be able to be the only archetype with that ability, or will anyone be able to use instruments for recreational and role-playing effects?
That's a good question. My desire is that we will have a system of instrument usage that accompanies a non-particular archetype requirement, right? So obviously, bards have the ability to play certain dances and songs, and those confer buffs to their party members. But also there's a RP slash I think cool skill opportunity when it comes to players making music and playing the music on certain instruments that they can acquire in the game. That's not something we've worked on yet, but it is a desire of mine. So we'll see how that goes.
And that wraps up this month's development update. I liked what I saw on the Cleric. What did you guys think about it? Let me know in the comments below. I am working on the first of a series of lore videos for the channel, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on it, and I'll see you all then.